minute. My name is Sam Evans. If you've not met me before, I'm head of programs at Smart School Councils and have a background as a primary school teacher. And my colleague Kyla is here as well. Kyla?
Hi, everyone. Most of you know me at this point. I'm the person that, bombards you with all those great emails, letting you know about what's going on with the program and, supporting you as things get going. And my background is teaching in secondary schools.
Thanks very much, Kyla. Now, the agenda for today's training is all about action teams and and the way we've titled it is starting your first action team, but no matter what interaction you've been with them so far, if you've come along to find out more about them, then you're very, very welcome. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to start with a bit of a reminder about who we are. We're going to then move on to look specifically at where action teams fit into our intervention when compared to the others and what their purpose is. We're going to show you where ideas for them come from within the school and from within the intervention. And then fourthly, and maybe this is the most important part of all, we're going to show you how to set them up and how to support this aspect of our program in your school. So those are and will be what we're going to be covering across the course of the next 45 minutes or so. But as mentioned at the start, we will start with our customary, by now at least, recap of us and our organization. And if you've got any questions as we go along, please pop them into the chat box and we'll try to address them throughout. Or if you prefer, you can hang around at the end of this to have a chat to either Kyla or myself. So for our customary reminder, which is very important indeed, I'm going to hand you over to Kyla for the next couple of slides.
Perfect. So like I said, everyone, really glad that you're here with us. And what I'm going to do is just take you through sort of whistle stop reminder of who we are, what we do, and why we do it. So as you all know, we are a teacher-led charity that was founded about 5 years ago by our colleagues, Greg and Asher, who were a youth worker and a policy advisor for the Department for Education. And our mission, the reason that we exist, is to help every child lead change through pupil voice and democracy. And the ways that we do this are multiple, but the big one that we work on and the one that you're all a part of is our core program, which is a whole school program that's dedicated to pupil voice. Our membership is growing, which is amazing. We've got over 300 member schools across the UK and abroad as well. And we work in a whole host of education institutions. So primary, secondaries, PRUs, SENS, and internationals as well. And the reason that we exist is that we firmly believe that young people should be leading change and using their voice through school councils and democracy. And as we all know, most schools in the UK already have a school council set up and do their pupil voice in that way. But we think the way that schools do this can and should be improved. And this is for a whole host of reasons. Lots of you have identified these reasons within your own school, but mainly with the traditional school council, the same things come up every year. They tend to also not have a lot of momentum across terms, then also across years. They tend to be very paper-based, and we're in a digital era now. Lots of digital tools in school. There we go. So we might as well be using them as well to facilitate pupil voice. They also tend to be very teacher-led. And remember, we want pupil voice to genuinely be led by the students. And, the fifth one, which is the biggest one for us, is this idea of the usual suspects. There's that small group of students that typically get involved in lots of other things in the school. And while it's great that they're getting involved in, the school council, we want to make sure that we're opening up pupil voice to every student, not just a select few. And then this last year, we all know the social distancing policies make it really difficult to have school-wide conversations. So we want to make sure that we have a sort of model in place that addresses all of these. And we're not the only ones who think that the traditional school council model should be revamped, so to say. So the Children's Commissioner came out and said that 2 in 5 pupils think that their school council, only 2 in 5 pupils think that their school council listens to them, which means 3/5 of people feel unheard in school, and it shouldn't be that way. Also, the University of Roehampton has come out with research saying that pupils who are more supported at home and have more than 200 books at home, 62% of them vote in school council elections, whereas pupils with less support at home, fewer than 10 books at home, only 30% of them vote in school council elections. So what we have then is the Smart School Council, which you're all part of, which involves every pupil. So your school council has every single student on it, and that's done through lots of important elements. But today, the element that we're going to be focusing on is action teams. So I'm going to hand it back to Sam, and he's going to get really into the nuts and bolts of this CPD for you all.
Thanks, Kyla. Like you say, lots of that should be familiar to you and is familiar to you. But I think it's important just to set the context behind where we are, why we're having these conversations, and why you guys are our very valued members. So, let's move on then to our purpose for this, which is to consider and to understand how we use action teams within this intervention and what their place is. And we start this, I suppose, by looking across our intervention as a whole. You'll recognize this graphic, I'm sure, and you'll see very clearly then our definition of action teams. And they are, for us, about everyone being enabled to lead change. And I guess there are a number of ways in which this can happen, and we'll get into the meat of all of this in a little while. But ultimately, and most importantly, the purpose of an action team is to give leadership opportunities to every young person in your institution to try and share a passion or affect change or make a difference in some way. That feels a bit abstract, I know this, and that can feel a bit large. But the purpose, I suppose, of putting this into our intervention is that it's supported by our class meetings and by our communications team, so that it's structured and helpful. And ultimately, that it's done in a way that is accessible, because we believe, as Kyla said so strongly, about the idea that this is an opportunity and develop an area to develop skills that should be available to everyone. So I guess one of the other things that comes across very clearly when we discuss action teams, at least for us as a team, is that we want to make sure that the voices of schools and young people are being captured in terms of explaining to you the benefits of them and the impact that they can make. So this is the first one of those we're going to put in. This is from Tracy Thompson from Hillview Primary School. And in her quote, which I hope you're reading, she talks very clearly about how her action teams in their school are a key way in which key stage and inter-year group relations are formed, often with the higher key stages in school, get involved in leading them, but getting participation from younger years within school. I think that's a really nice thing. It's something that we can all aspire to, I think, as educators, and a point that's very well made by Tracy. So we'll see a few more of these as we go along. I'm not going to read each one of them out because I think that's a bit tedious, but if you want to read them as we go along, that's great. So what are they then? Action teams are pupil-led initiatives to create change or, and this is important, share a passion. And they can be about anything and started by anyone. That's something that we also can't overemphasize. And that, again, may sound quite big, but as we go along, hopefully we'll get a sense of how we manage this and how we can make sure that that isn't something that feels overwhelming. They come from two places, I suppose. They come from something you could term social action, which is something that is increasingly, I think, upon schools' radars and something that's very important to us as an organization. And by social action, we mean young people leading change in their school community and in the environment around it for a cause, something that they believe strongly about, something that maybe is a lived experience or something that they get politically exercised about, whatever it may be. It's a good way of summarizing social action. Or another one of those, and is equally as valid and important, is sharing a passion. Our perfect example of this, I think, sharing a passion, although I suppose it could be social action too, is through Stopsley Primary School in the tweet that we're sharing on this slide here, where a bunch of young people have got together and said, you know what, we really care about animal welfare, and we want to create an action team that's all about rescuing animals in our playground from the potential destruction of small shoes and feet, which I think is incredible. And as I said earlier, we'll try and share some more examples about this as we go through. But they are our two distinct forms. The other one that we talk about very often when it comes to sharing a passion is Greg's favorite ever action team, which was in a London school and was all about a young lad who loved Mr. Bean, wanting to share his love and passion for Mr. Bean with his peers, which was an absolute delight to witness when we visited that school. So that's what they are, and where I guess we get inspiration from them in two different places. Why are they important? They're important because there are there will undoubtedly be loads of initiatives that go on across school. But what isn't always factored into those initiatives is the opportunity for student leadership, for students to go in and to lead and define and to take those initiatives forward. And action teams are our way of giving those opportunities through this intervention to every young person to develop those skills. Secondly, they're important because when we consider social action and this idea of the benefits of what trying to create social and community change looks like, the statistics are really clear about how this looks in the UK, and it's overwhelmingly the case, as you can see here from the Ipsos Mori research, that this is something that more privileged and affluent young people do as opposed to those who aren't. That's something that we should try and tackle, right? We don't want all of the great benefits that come from being involved in social action to be entrenched within a privileged few. We want those opportunities to be open to everyone. And then I think thirdly, why action teams are important is because we need to reflect, I think, as educators on the place of pupil voice in our school. If we believe in pupil voice and we want it to be at the heart of what our institutions are, then we need to ensure that pupil-led opportunities are embedded within our practice and that we are handing the reins over to young people to affect our school communities. That, again, can be really difficult to achieve, and action teams are our way of ensuring that this can happen in a structured way. So if you're new to action teams, maybe you're one of our newer members, or for whatever reason it's been something that you find it hard to access so far, which is completely understandable, and you haven't yet introduced them to your school, then one of the first resources that we're going to share with you, that Kyle's going to pop in the chat box now, but we will also email out to you later on. And if you're watching this on record, we will be sure to show you where to find these on the resources website. Is an assembly. It's a slide deck that you can use in assembly to introduce action teams to your school, to get a sense of buzz, I guess, sort of rippling across the school community about what ideas they have for change and how they can go about trying to change them. So please feel free to use that. It's a really important, I think, and a helpful resource. So if we were going to summarize then what action teams are, this is how I would do it. This is how I have done it in the slides. Action teams are all about giving young people leadership opportunities and giving everyone an opportunity to develop their skills. This is something that I hope you see the value of. And if we're all on board with this idea of what they are and can be, then what we'll do now is start to move on to the practical sides of things. How do we get these set up, and what do they look like, and what sort of best practice tips are there? Which is what our focus will be now. So, action teams then. Now we get the sense of the theory behind them and why they're important. We're going to look now at where they come from. And by that, I mean where ideas for action teams come from and how we as lead teachers in our schools or our communications team as our support can look for them to give them a bit of, or I guess to give their prominence a bit of place in school. So where do they come from? Ideas for action teams can come from two sources. They can come from more, but these are the ones that we tend to see most often with our schools. They come from class meetings, or they come from things your school are already doing. Now, I'll tackle each one of these separately, but these are how, at least in our experience for supporting schools, the vast majority of action teams are set up. An example of that here comes from Loreto, which is a Manchester secondary school, and their action group, which is all about Black Lives Matters and giving prominence to Black stories beyond the ones that are often shared in October around Black History Month. And this is an example of an action team that came directly resulting from a class meeting on a similar subject. And that's the first one that we're going to look at. Lise, I can see you've got a question there about the comms team. and how action teams relate to that. I'll answer that really quickly whilst we're here so that we can all hear the question. It's this. Could we start an action team without having a comms team set up already? We'd like to get started, but we think we might just wait to get the comms team ready for September. It's a good question, Elise, and I suppose this is my answer. One is that no, you don't necessarily need to wait for a communications team. If you have identified opportunities for action teams to start and you think that the ingredients are there, then go for it. But it's absolutely the case that the part of the communications team role is to support young people who are embarking upon and are currently being in action teams. And if you think that it's better, therefore, to wait until September when they're in place, then we would fully support that decision. So, good question. Hopefully, that's a useful answer. Let's keep going and let's look at our action teams coming from class meetings. So, how to use class meetings to scope out ideas for action teams. So there are a number of ways you can do this. The first one is that actions that, if you think of the questions that you ask in your class meetings, whether you do them weekly, half-termly, termly, however frequently you do them, you know that when you're creating them for the next time, you have to have an action associated. So if you've asked a question in the class meeting, where can behavior be improved in school, as an example, you know that in the next one you're going to set up, there's going to be an action associated to that. If the result was corridors, then the action might be, okay, well, we need to do something now to improve behavior in our corridors. And here we go. We've got our idea for an action team. Is it the case that we can approach a group of students and give them and set them that challenge to say, right, you're going to be the corridor monitoring action team, and your role and your responsibility is going to be to try and go out throughout school to promote better behavior in these areas, because we know through our student voice, through our class meetings, that young people think this is an area of improvement. So that's one. Secondly, ideas can be submitted through the class meeting tool. So not necessarily the question that you're asking that's going to be your big discussion and that everybody votes on in the meeting. But the second question, I'm sure you'll remember it, the one that we ask after the main debate, where we say, is there anything you'd like to do to improve the school this week? And young people have 3 minutes to decide if they do and share any ideas they've got. These ideas, and we'll look at them, an example of them in a second, show us a breadth of opinion across the school, many of which can become excellent action teams. So this is a really good potential source. And then the last thing to do is to check, I guess, for ideas that correspond with wider school activities. So if you've discussed either in your main class meeting question or in the supplementary question, something that is linked to what's going on elsewhere in school, that can be a potential source of ideas too. That latter one being something that we'll come to, I guess, with our non-class meeting orientated questions. But for now, let me show you an example of looking at your class meetings, looking at the usage that you get and all of the incredible voice that's being captured through your school, and turning those into class meeting and into action teams. So you'll recognize this, I'm sure. This is an actual example of one of our member schools and some data from their class meetings. So I'm sure you'll recognize all of the information you see on the sort of left and middle hand side of the tables, taking the result. But the bit I'm referring to specifically is the ideas section on the right hand side. This is, as we've alluded to already, where we ask the question, do you have any ideas to improve anything in the school? You can see here what the young people have submitted. So there are a couple of ideas. Oliver wants to clean up the play area. Freya wants to celebrate Earth Day in school. William is really concerned about the lack of recycling boxes. Now, with this incredible insight into opinion in school, yourself as the coordinators in school, or again, at least I guess this links to your question, the communications team should be reviewing these and saying, okay, is there anything within these ideas that we can approach those young people? So can we, as the communications team, and the answer to this is yes, go up to William. We know what year group he's in year 5. And we're going to say to him, okay, William, you think there should be more recycling boxes in school. Like, what do you want to do about that? Can we help you to set up an action team where you're going to consider how we can improve our recycling as a school? And it's very likely to be the case that William will be very excited about that idea. It's also, I suppose, a possibility that William might think, no, I don't want to do that. It's a great idea. I feel passionately about it, but I don't want to do anything about it myself. And that's the case. That's fine. That's not going to become an action team because the person that suggested the idea doesn't want to do it, and that's okay. But there will be those who do, and when they do, they'll want to get their friends involved, and they'll feel really strongly about it. And this is all the ingredients we need for getting an action team up and running. So we'll come back to that step in a little while. That's going to be the okay. Practically, what does it look like? And we've got a step by step process or a flow chart that will help us through that. But the point I'm trying to make here, and I hope I'm making it reasonably clearly, is that within those ideas will be the sort of recipe and the ingredients for excellent action teams that we can find young people who want to do it, and we can show them how they get started. I think that should be clear. So let's then just think for a moment about what our schools are doing already. And because this is important as well, um, it is absolutely the case in my educational career that whenever you go to visit schools, schools will be doing an array of incredible things, either as clubs or initiatives or opportunities for young people to get involved in extracurricular activities, which are brilliant. The question, I suppose, that we would pose to schools who do those things is how many of them are student led? And how many of them give opportunities to students who go along to them to lead the activities and to define what they look like? If the answer to that is all of them, then great. Maybe you don't need action teams that come from things your school's already doing. But if the answer to that is, oh no, this is something we think we could improve on, then this is your opportunity to look at some of these things like an eco group or the young people who are part of interviewing for candidates for teaching positions or those who are involved in sports and dance clubs to say, well, look, if our I don't know, badminton club. That's probably a really terrible example, but let's go with it. Wants to become student led, then maybe we need to rebrand as a badminton action team and know that it's our responsibility as the young people in it to decide what we're going to do and take that ownership away from whichever adult is currently leading it. And I think this is a really interesting challenge that we can set ourselves for looking at what we're doing already. So however you want to approach, if the purpose of this CPD is for us to sit there and think, okay, well, how can we start action teams in our school? And it's up to you, I guess, to decide if you want to look at your class meetings as the inspiration for your action teams, or look at what you're doing already and say, okay, well, who do I approach in my colleagues to say, I've got a way to make your club, to your initiative, or it is to make it more student led. Isn't that great? And this is how you can do it. You could do a mixture of those things, of course you can, but I think that's the thing I want you to reflect upon in this moment is to say, okay, which one of those makes sense for us in the way that we work? Because this is, I think, for us as far as like the experts are concerned of smart school councils, the way that we've seen lots of success in action teams with other schools. So if I was going to summarize this section, which I've had an attempt to do once more, this is how I do it. It doesn't require as much thought as it might seem to identify perfect opportunities to bring action teams to life. And importantly, and depending this, it's about this opportunity for young people to lead the initiatives. Okay, cool. We're doing well, team. We're now getting to the point at which then, if you're with me still, you can say, okay, Sam, I understand what they are. I can understand where they come from. But the thing that I sometimes struggle with is knowing how to get started with them and the practicalities of what this looked like. And if that's the case, that's again very understandable because we've got a lot on. The school environment looks very different at the moment and has done ever before. And our job is to try and make this as easy as possible. So let's have a go at doing it. I've got some general advice, I suppose, that I want to give you first before we go into a flow chart or a sequence of steps that will give us a really good structure for this. And this general advice comes from my time and Kyla's time in supporting our member schools to implement the intervention. So I'll mention a few of them. Uh, the one I think that I would encourage you all to consider is the idea of introducing action teams with predetermined number in your head before you set out. So you think to yourself, okay, great. If I launch this across the school, I'm likely to have a plethora of response and loads of interest, and that'll be really hard for us to manage, and maybe be a bit overwhelming, and then they may not go very well, and then the idea will be lost, and people will lose interest and fall away. If you're worried about those things, then having slots available for them is something that lots of our schools do very successfully. So they might say, when you launch action teams in an assembly, great, we've got 3 slots or 4 slots, or however many it is, available across summer term for young people to start action teams and to get involved. The way that you would do this, we'll talk about that in a second, through practical examples of completing an action team form and submitting it to the communications team or to yourself to review. But you might start with that expectation. This is the number we have available, to give that sense of urgency and maybe a bit of sort of exclusivity around it as well. Secondly, I guess, is to make sure that your colleagues know that this is happening and that you'll be asking for their support. Their support isn't in depth or by any sense laborious, but some that's needed. And if we can set the expectations for that soon, then we're more likely to get it. Again, like rather than sort of trying to launch action teams surreptitiously or alongside what you're doing already, I think having a specific assembly devoted to it is a really advantageous thing to do. The use of your communications team is really important. We talked about this, I guess, with Elise's question, but it's about how their role is to encourage, support, and challenge young people who are participating in action teams or could potentially do so. Don't fixate on success. Action teams are allowed to fail. They are student-led initiatives. And if I, as a young person who feel really strongly about something, decide to set up an action team, but then I don't have commitment, or I get distracted by playing rugby at playtime and therefore forget to do it, and the action team fails, that's fine. That's okay. Because what we are learning is, I suppose what the young person is learning is about how the outcome of something they care about is dependent upon the amount of time and effort they're going to put into it. And that's a really good life lesson to learn. So it's okay if they fail. And then lastly, and this is again very, very super practical, is that when they're up and running, when you have your first couple, don't forget to put them on your progress board so they have a really prominent place in school for everybody else to see that they exist, that they're going well, and for them to be inspired to get involved themselves. So that was my general advice. We should move now to like practical steps. So this is an example of, and I'll come to this at the very, very end, where you find these action team forms that you can get from the members dashboard that will be filled out by either the communications team or young people across the school who are passionate about the idea and want to get an action team started. So step 1, and I've tried to couch this first step a little bit in reflection of when we discuss the roots and the ideas for action teams and where they come from, either from the class meetings or from what you're doing in school already. So there are 2 routes. So if you want to start up action teams and you want to use your class meetings to do so, it's about inviting students who suggested an idea, all your comms team doing this, and have spotted them as a potential action team in the making. So going through the data, looking for a number of things like great ideas, common themes, whatever they might be, things that are linked to what your school is really interested in terms of school improvement plans, or in schools in terms of development, what they may be, and saying, okay, right, me as the lead teacher or the communications team within which there might be action team developers, go and approach this young person, talk to them about action teams, get them to fill out a form and see if they want to get going. And then if you're using what your school is doing already, it's about identifying and meeting with anyone that is involved with pre-existing clubs or activities to share the idea of how becoming an action team is something that they can hugely benefit from, and that becoming a part of an action team is an opportunity to hand over leadership responsibilities to students involved. Step 2 then is all about getting your communications team when you've identified these areas, or the young people to fill out the forms. So the form is really simple. They ask a series of questions like, what is your idea? Who's going to help you achieve it? What do you need to be successful at this idea? And do you have an adult sponsor? And I'll come back to that adult sponsor section in a second. But it's like the formal process of starting an action team, and it gives you an opportunity, I suppose, to quality assure and also to have an eye towards safeguarding over the activities that are being discussed. It is important, I think, that that sort of check is in place so that if there's anything that comes through or is suggested that isn't appropriate for whatever reason, that's tackled at an earlier opportunity. So next, then we've got the way of finding our sponsor. And I'll talk about this in a second, but each action team needs an adult sponsor. And it could be someone that shares a similar interest, a member of staff, wider staff, whoever it might be that shares a similar interest to the activity area they're undertaking, or whether it's someone that, for example, is linked to an area of responsibility in school that is matched to what the action team are up to. Now, sponsorship isn't a big deal, and sometimes it can seem like that when you communicate it to your peers and your colleagues. But essentially, it's this: it's providing a space for a group of young people to meet and perform their activities, and then secondly, generally being aware of what they're up to. You're not there to run it. You're not there to ensure they turn up on time. You're not there to provide any sense of like a purposeful interaction. It's just those two things. It's a right, guys, I'm going to be in my classroom at lunchtime for half an hour doing some marking. You can come and use my classroom. And then when you're there, being aware of what their activities are, because if there's anything that shouldn't be happening or things that are for whatever reason inappropriate, you want that being flagged up by that sponsor so that they can, like I said earlier, provide that sense of check and balance to what's going on. I think that the success in ensuring colleagues are happy to do this comes from us approaching them before we start action teams and launch them and say, hey, this is how I could really appreciate your support in this area. Then step 4 is the practical side of things again, helping them to find a time and a date and a place to conduct their activities and then share that through the progress board. And the point of sharing it is this: we want young people from across the breadth of the school to want to come along to this. We want them to, if they're interested, feel like they can get involved. We want them to ensure that it's accessible. And the main way that we do this is by making sure that people are aware of what's going on. There are other ways of doing this. Some of our member schools, when an action team begins, is give their young people an opportunity to go and present in assembly, or I don't know, an equivalent time that is appropriate that says, "Hi, we are pupils X, Y, and Z, and we really care about protecting the worms from being stamped on outside in the playground, and so we're starting the animal rescue action team. If you're interested and you'd like to join us, this is when we meet. This is when we do our stuff, and you'd be welcome to come along." And that works really well when we've seen it in school. It's very cute as well. And it gives an opportunity for this interaction that Tracy talked about in her quote at the start between students that wouldn't normally mix in school, which I think is a huge advantage. So this is another resource that we will share. Thank you to Kyla for putting this in the chat box. But again, don't remember, we will also email it to you. It is the flowchart that just identifies and pins down these 4 steps for everything you'd need to get an action team up and running. And it's something that, again, can be done in the summer term, or it could be something you consider that you're going to do in the next academic year if you're already busy embedding the other elements of the intervention, which is completely and absolutely fine. So how would I summarize this section? This is how I'd summarize it. Getting started and giving action teams a go is a fundamentally important part of what the opportunities you should be providing for your students. Feels a bit preachy, that, but I stand by it. The idea, I suppose, is that if you've come to join our program, which we are so glad, and you're so welcome to be here. And the program is designed in its three constituent parts. This one is as important as the other two. May not always get that same prominence because we like tech, or we love action teams, sorry, class meetings, and how everybody, it gets everybody involved in discussing them. But if we want to go to that next step to give everybody leadership opportunities, then we need to be considering how we implement action teams and how we can support them when they're up and running. I suppose that latter question, how we support them when we're up and running, we haven't really covered, because the nature of this training was to consider how we go about setting them up and having our first goes at them. But I suppose we are always around for that support should you reach that point and you feel like you need it. Which takes me very nicely, good segue, Evans, onto where you can find support for this. So the first thing I want to mention is that on the members dashboard, if you haven't already got to this point, there's a whole section devoted to action teams, where the resources that accompany it are things we're sharing with you today, things that we'll share with you in the email, and also a lot of other things, like a written guide that will support you to be successful in this area. The other place then, so if you go and you visit there and for whatever reason the answer isn't there, which I would be very surprised of, but sometimes that's the case, then support also comes from principally Kyla, who's excellent at doing that. Through our membership email, through our members Facebook group. If you haven't yet joined this, I would encourage you to do so, because it's a good way of sourcing answers from other teachers who are doing very similar things to you. And then lastly, there are also the meetups that we do once every half term, I think, Kyla, in Facebook and YouTube, where you can come along, ask us a question, and of myself or Kyla or Greg, or sometimes teachers, to get an answer from those two. So we get to the point at which we can ask questions. We've got another one from Elise, I think, that's come through in the chat box. Kyla's nodding at me, so I'm glad you're quality assuring that for me, just in case I'm wrong. This is Elise's question. And if anybody else has one, please do so. And a bit like Elise, and pop it in the chat box. Or, as we'll be coming to the close in a couple of minutes, depending on how many questions we've got, hang around in the Zoom at the end and we can have a chat to you one-on-one. So this is Elise's question. Sorry for mentioning support, don't worry about it, it's fine. If you are using a group who are sharing a passion, i.e. a choir, what type of actions would they be doing? Okay, cool. That's a great question, Elise. Thank you very much for it. So I guess if we're looking at the area of things that already exist, or I want to share a passion, and if that passion is I want to set up a choir, or if the choir already exists and it's about giving opportunities to students to lead it, then the actions would be a number of things, I suppose. If you're sharing a passion and the thing doesn't already exist, then your action is creating the thing, right? You're the choir action team, and we meet and we presumably sing. And the opportunity for that person that's starting the action team is to shape what that looks like. So their first meeting as the choir action team might be to discuss what songs everybody likes and what they'd like to sing in the next one. Or it might be about sort of sourcing the equipment that they might need to get going. So it could be about saying, well, we need instruments, or we need a speaker, wherever it might be. It depends, I suppose, what the nature of that question is. But the purpose of this is that whatever they're going to be doing, however they make it happen, it's the young people themselves deciding. So if they're going to say, right, well, my passion is the choir, I'm just going to pick a song and I want everybody to join in with me, then great. They're the ones that are leading their action team, and that's going to be what the action team looks like. So if their first meeting is having a go at singing, I don't know, Kumbaya, that's a terrible example, then great, that's what they're going to do. If it's the case that the choir already exists, and we're thinking about, okay, what their action is going to be if they rebrand as an action team, then I suppose it's about sort of saying to the pre-existing group, let's say it's the choir, right? Okay, I don't know, I am the choir master or music teacher. It's probably more likely to be the latter. Then, as we're becoming an action team, my role is less to lead you in our activities, and more to support you in deciding what those activities are going to be. So how do we change choir to reflect your opinions more? How is it that you can lead and shape choir so that it works in a way that you prefer? So that could be the nature of the music that's discussed, or it could be the activities themselves, whatever. Has that helped, Elise? I hope that answers your question. I've tried to answer it both from the action team doesn't already exist and what it would look like if it did already. I'm glad it makes sense. Great. Thank you for letting me know. I don't think we've received any other questions at this point, Kyla, have we? Okay, cool. So what we'll do, folks, before we finish is we'll check in with Kyla to see if there's anything that you want to raise with us, Kyla, or anything you want to bring our attention to. And then we'll take it from there. So, Kyla.
Yeah, so I just want to make it really clear that, I know that with the social distancing policies that are in place, this term, it can be quite difficult to get, cross year group action teams going, but it's perfectly possible if, it's an interest in your school to set up action teams even within year groups. So maybe you have a class that's really passionate about a certain project and turning that into an action team and then sharing their progress, through the progress board in your school. And of course, like if all of this is just like, no, it's way too much for summer term, it's perfectly fine to just have all of this information in your head and then have this as a plan for when we come back, in autumn term next year. That's really what I wanted to say.
Thank you. No, that was very useful. Thanks very much, Kyla. Okay, folks. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I hope that this discussion and the resources that we're sharing with you are helpful. We wish you the very best of luck in your action team's journey, whatever they look like. As ever, we would be very keen to hear about how you're getting on and support you in any way we can. So do stay in touch with us and let us know what you find works and what you find doesn't work. Because ultimately that's information that helps us to adapt our intervention. And also if there are success stories, which I'm sure there'll be many, we can share them across our community of teachers as well. Please keep an eye out for the email that will have the slides that we've shared, the resources that we shared, and anything else we thought would be useful for you to have that will be sent over before the end of the day today. I think I'm right in saying that, kind of. And then if you do want to have a chat to either myself or Kyla, because you've got a very specific set of circumstances in school and you just want a bit of extra support, then feel free to hang around because we'll be very happy to have a chat with you. So thank you very much for coming along, those of you who are happy to head off and don't have any specific questions. And we'll give it like a 30-second pause or so. And then anyone that's still around after 30 seconds, we'll come and chat to you. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.